Excellent. Today we are going to talk about story ideas, what they are, and how to get them. So we're talking about the tiny acorn that grows in to the mighty oak, the very first germ of a story. Where do you get your ideas from? Is this something that we can cultivate as writers, or is it just a matter of waiting for lightning to strike? Matt, what are your thoughts?
So the first place that I always get my ideas, because I love to travel, is the travels that I've done and places I've visited. So, for example, I visited the Mayan pyramid in Chichen Itza, and that inspired part of the story to my first novel. So travel is great. I've written a lot of stories about places that I've been.
Is that first novel already available?
It is.
What's it called?
It's called the Auriga Project, and there's a lot of Mayan cultural influence in a pyramid in it. So that was really cool. It's nothing like the Chichen Itza tourist site that it is today, but it sparked that thought.
Well, okay, I'm glad you said this, Matt. I've read the book, so I know exactly what it's about. So, but why don't you tell us a little bit about the oak tree? We know the acorn is that you went on this trip and you saw the pyramids. What did that turn into?
Yeah, so after I got back from the trip, I think it was a couple months later that the idea even occurred to me. While I was visiting the Chichen Itza site, I didn't even think about writing a story. I was just so fascinated by everything that was there. But I wrote about it in my journal, and a couple months later, I was like, I should write this story about a girl who wakes up on a beach. I think that's how it started. And I didn't even know when I started the story that the pyramid and everything else was going to be in there, but it showed up while I was writing. And then I started doing other research. I started reading about the Mayan culture, which I've always been fascinated by, and that kind of made its way into the story. And when I ran into a situation where I needed to know more about them, I went out and got some books and started reading about the Mayan culture, and that all kind of made its way into the book. So it started in one place and ended up in a totally different place, and it included a lot of more realistic Mayan cultural knowledge that we know through anthropological studies and such, history books and what we know about the Mayans, but it was nothing like the trip to Chichen Itza, but it was inspired by that trip.
Right. And well, in that other place where you transferred all of that cultural information you gathered through your travel and your research is a whole nother planet, right? Right. Yeah, absolutely. So it's a science fiction book, right? It's not even like they're going to Chichen Itza. It's like I totally picked up this location and put it on a different planet, and there's a whole backstory there, but you can take places you visit and put them somewhere else, in fiction especially. You can kind of transpose it or transform it. Somebody might write a fantasy, a city in a fantasy book based on Chicago, right? There's nothing wrong with that. Right.
Because Chicago gives you that plan on which to build something else. And that makes your job a lot easier, instead of building the whole thing, you have a blueprint to start from.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's fun to hear these stories, these anecdotes about the seed of something and then what it becomes and how wildly different and fantastic that can actually be. And I liked when you were saying, you thought, I'll write a story about a girl waking up on a beach. And then you had this vision of something else coming into it. One of my books, Saving Annabelle, which isn't published yet, is a historical novel. And it started with a vision, and I don't know where this vision came from. I just had an image in my head of a girl in a bathtub, in an old-fashioned clawfoot bathtub, maybe in the 1920s or 30s, and her sister was sitting outside the tub, holding up her arm and washing her arm with a washcloth, and there's something wrong with the girl in the tub, and then there was a spirit or a ghost or something in the corner of the room watching them. So it's just this tableau, just a picture of these three figures, and something wrong with one, and the other one was obviously the caretaker, and there's this mystery of the spirit in the corner, and I didn't know what any of it meant or where any of it would lead to, but it led to the process of writing is really a process of discovery often, and so it led to a historical novel set in the 1860s and 1870s. I backed it up from the 1920s or so because I wanted more isolation and less means of communication. So it's in a rural setting, and the spirit was the younger girl's wet nurse. And there's no ghost. There's actually no spirit in the novel, but I think in that tableau I had to see the spirit of the wet nurse to discover this tragedy that happened in the girl's family. So...
Interesting.
Yeah, I think it's fun, kind of like retracing a conversation, like playing telephone, like how many things had to happen to create this thing.
So you don't know where that image came from? It was just like out of the blue, just hit you?
Yeah, out of the blue. I mean, it wasn't a dream, but it's kind of like from nowhere, kind of like a dream. It was just this,
It's wild.
image. Yeah. How about you, Kathryn?
I kind of have a lot of those things. I have both sides happen, and I don't get the opportunity to travel a ton. And when I do, it's usually very local. But I kind of travel through like podcasts and listening to I love history and listening to history and listening to all those sorts of stories. And you can get so many cool seeds for ideas out of things that have happened that are so even minute. And then I'll get the same thing like you do, Alida, where I'll wake up from a dream and I'll be like, whoa, there was this thing. And then my brain just spins off like 1,000 different ideas until I come up with a conflict and a story idea and all of that. But I will say that hasn't always been the case. I'm usually not a story idea machine. It's kind of like a learned habit, you know? I actually went through a phase right after college where I wasn't writing for a couple of years and I didn't have any ideas at all. And I was really depressed because I was like, oh man, I call myself a writer, I have no ideas, and I don't know what I'm going to do. And it's getting into the habit of thinking about story that produces ideas for me. So once I started just saying, oh, I'm just going to write a fantasy story about, I don't know, let's pick the most atypical fantasy story. Let's write a story about magic and elves. And then 3 or 4 weeks later, you start having the more original stories because you're writing and you're in the process and you're creating. And then when you start creating, then your brain starts being creative. So it's this funny reverse process that you think, oh, I have to have an idea in order to write. And sometimes you have to start writing first to have those ideas. I mean, you just pick something and go for it. And then, you know, and then maybe you'll start having the more creative ideas, and then you'll start dreaming about it, or then you'll start just free form thought brainstorming out of the blue. So
yes, I'm so glad you said that, Kathryn, because that is absolutely true. Everybody believe it. Go start writing. Doesn't matter if you've got the corniest, dumbest idea in the world, just go start playing with it.
Oh, yeah.
When I entered the MFA program, I had spent years working on a couple of novels. I'm writing a short story now and then when I was inspired, when I had the idea to write the short story. And when I got into the MFA program, and I was taking 2 classes a semester, and I had readings and process papers and term papers and creative writing assignments every single week. Oh my God, talk about necessity being the mother of invention. My wheels got turning and I had more ideas than I could ever use. And I realized exactly what you were describing, Kathryn, that when you start working with your mind that way, with your creativity, you get more creativity. It's this exponential increase. It was just fantastic, the expansion. It was so much fun. And I hadn't experienced that before because I was in one world with one set of characters working on these 1 or 2 novels for years while I was, you know, a mom, an at-home mom. That was my career back then. So even if you're writing in the margins, just play with ideas, play with short stories, get your journal out, let your creativity explode.
And let it come from what's around you. Like, you are going to have those ideas that come from the movie that you watched last week, or the book that you read, or anything, the podcast that you listened to, the person who was walking down the street. Like, you're going to have ideas that don't feel that original, but they will become more and more original as you play with them. So
definitely. Yeah, I heard once that Bram Stoker never went to Transylvania. So that the entire Dracula novel was armchair travel.
Yep.
Just research in your imagination. So, if you can travel, that's awesome. But if you can't, don't let it stop you. Yeah.
Totally. I love that idea about you, Kathryn. You said that when you start creating, your brain starts being creative. A lot of people have this idea that, and it's kind of this fear-based idea where they say, I'm going to run out of creativity, or like, this is the only idea I'm ever going to have. But in my experience, it's been the opposite. The more you exercise the creative muscle, the more ideas you have. So instead of thinking about it like a well that's going to run dry, you should think about it like a muscle that you're building. The more ideas that you work with, the more ideas will come to you.
Definitely.
So one story I wrote, Wild Animal, came out of one of the classes in that MFA program. And the germ for it, the seed, was a newspaper clipping. So, Kathryn, you mentioned getting ideas from podcasts. I mean, you can find ideas anywhere, headlines, people sitting on the bus. Just open your awareness and your consciousness. And this class had a really interesting assignment. I had heard before, of course, that you can go through the newspaper, look for headlines, look for articles, whatever, write a story. For this class, everybody had to bring 3 newspaper clippings to class. And then you had to pick 2 and pass them down. So you passed in such a way that you wound up with 2 clippings from 2 different people, right? And then you were limited to writing a story about one of these 2 clippings you were given. So you can do this with friends. You don't have to be in an MFA program to do this, right? And it was such an interesting exercise because at first I thought, I don't like reading the newspaper. This isn't where I get ideas from. I don't even want to do it, but fine, it's assigned. I got my 3 clippings. I brought them in. Then lo and behold, we pass them down. I get 2 clippings, and I'm like, I don't want to write about either of these, damn it, right? And one of the clippings was this little news piece from a small community in Wisconsin that had a tiny zoo, and in the zoo was a black bear. And a woman in her 50s was at the zoo with her boyfriend and her granddaughter. And she took a hot dog up to the fence, and she offered the hot dog to the black bear, and the bear came over and ate the hot dog and 2 of her fingers.
Yeah.
So I wrote this story from the point of view of the bear. Actually, a witness bear. I have 2 bears. Narrator bear and other bear. I don't really give them names. So the point of view is narrator bear. Well, this story was published, and the journal it was published in nominated it for a Pushcart Prize. So you just never know, what's going to come out of these funny little exercises.
Yeah.
So,
Yep.
go get some friends and swap newspaper clippings.
Yeah, or have them give you a challenge. Like, give me 2 crazy ideas, and they could come up with the most random things, and that could become this amazing story. You just never know until you start digging in.
Right. It goes back to what we've been saying about building the creative muscle. So if you only work with what you like, it's like, I only like riding my bike. Well, I might have great quadriceps, but, my core sucks or whatever, right? You have to go do a variety of things. And so when you are challenged to work a story from an idea that you didn't choose within parameters that feel constricting at first, that actually forces you into a new area of creativity.
Right. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So it's totally worth doing.
And on top of those challenges, finding a group of people that you can brainstorm ideas with. Like, don't be afraid that your story idea is going to be stolen. Nobody's going to write the same story as you're ever going to write. So, feel free to share ideas, give suggestions, take suggestions, allow things to, flow between you and your friends, even if they're not writers. People have ideas that you can interweave into your own ideas to make them, more intriguing. So,
yes. Yeah. And in fact, that was something I witnessed in the MFA program, because we would get assignments like, take this poem, use it as inspiration, and write a short story. So you've got 15 people in a classroom, and they're all using the same poem, and they're all writing a short story. And then you see each other's work, and you realize they're all totally different. Totally different. Yep. So, if you've got a writing group or just some friends who are writers, play with this stuff. Go see what happens.
Yeah. I like the idea of the writing group, especially because what's great about a writing group, and it's good to bounce ideas off friends too, because they're usually readers, right? They've read some books. They have a good sense of what makes a good story. But writers are great not only because they can say, "Oh, I don't like that idea," or "I would approach it from a different angle," because they have that experience of writing, but they also give you the challenge, right? Because if you see somebody else doing something with an idea, you might want to rise to the occasion.
Definitely. Yeah. So, Matt and Kathryn, give us another example of a story idea, something that came to you, how it came, what it turned into.
Oh, man.
I put you on the spot. All right. Well, while you think about it, while you pick your example, I'll give a third one. The Murder in Skog Hall. I just felt like writing a ghost story because I thought it would be fun to explore the genre and see what I could do with it. So the seed of your book or your next story could be as simple as that. Like, what would I do with science fiction? Or what would I do with a monster? Or what would I do? And it started as a ghost story that turned into a novel I really liked. When I was about halfway through it, I realized, this is going to be a series. Now I've got the second book out and I'm working on the third. So I didn't know when I sat down to write that day that this was going to be a series. I just wanted to write a ghost story.
That's great. It's like something huge came out of a little experiment.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. That's fun. I have one more. I like to write about my fears, and I guess I was a weird kid, but when I was a kid I had this fear that the world was going to be overpopulated. So in my early 20s I started writing a story about an overpopulated city, and that started a long time ago. So if there's something you're afraid of, you can write about that, not just to exercise the fear, but to get a good story out of it.
Cool, great idea. Kathryn,
the
how
novel
about you?
the novel that I'm working on right now, I just was trying to think of what the idea was that spiraled this whole crazy thing out of control. It was actually a writing excuses prompt where they said, write a story about magic that has to be painted onto something in order to work. And that went from painting magic to painting magic on yourself to runes on a body to be the catalyst for magic. And then now my entire culture is based on this type of magic that was one little one-line prompt from a writing podcast. So
I love
That's
it. That's great. All right, that is going to do it for the Storyworks Roundtable. Thank you so much for watching, and thank you, Matt and Kathryn, for sharing your great ideas.